All right, before we get started on new stuff, I want to go over, fluency observation assignment. I kind of talked about that last week a little bit. It took me a little bit long getting stuff put together than I was hoping, so I just want to make sure, see if you guys had questions on it, because there's a couple different options in terms of how you complete it. So basically, it's practicing using a fluency assessment, either with someone and doing it like live type thing, or you can watch this recording that we've got and we can do it that way as well. So, excuse me, if you want to do it with somebody, it could be, again, and it can be a child, right? Or it could be an adult, it doesn't really matter, right? Just somebody to practice with. There are amongst the multiple attachments I have to this, there are copy of different grade levels of reading passages, right? So you can click on that and pull it open and then use whichever grade level. Right? If you're using if you have an adult practice with you and they read it 100%, that's fine, right? It doesn't have to be somebody making mistakes, but all the way up to fifth grade in here, there is information reading somewhere. There. Yes, yeah,
Standing squares items.
yeah. There's that and a lot of places use I Fly, which is a Florida Institute for Research or something like that. I'm not as familiar with some of that stuff as I'm just getting into language, teaching language arts stuff. So, but they would use that curriculum. That's what I'm looking for in a lot of places as well. So, anyway, so yeah, you can pick if you want me to print one out for you in terms of the list here or the passage, I can do that, or if you, I mean, you can have whoever you're working with read it off here as well if you want. Any of the stuff that you need, if you want to use it or print it off, you just have to let me know. So that is there. If you are going to have somebody do it fixed, right? So they get a copy, you pull a copy, you just mark the words, right, that are incorrect. Also in here, there is the how to do the assessment, right? So that's kind of a step-by-step walkthrough of how to do it, right? So there you go, mark the words, how you go through, start the timer, it's a minute, right? So that we do that, so mark the errors as you go through, any hesitations, even if the words are wrong, repetition, etc. They add a word, where they stopped, and you mark that. And then you go through and score that. You can do that on the same script that you have with it, right? So how many total words did they read? Right? How many errors did they have? So total words read is all of them, right? Even the ones that are incorrect. Okay, so that's total words that they read. Well, how many errors there were? Then you work through that process of subtracting how many you got wrong, et cetera. And you can do the accuracy component on that. Same thing here as I subtract that, then you multiply that by 100, give that percentage piece. So that's an easy one. 95 out of 100. 48 more than 100. So, and then additional things that are not counted in the words per minute or the fluency piece, that's something that you can note, right? We talked about proxy but last week about how they read the pause, that they use punctuation correctly, all that stuff they read. So that's something they added to there as just a note or an observation. And maybe it was perfect or great, and if it was, that's fine. Okay, so that's the step-by-step piece in there too. Questions? Yes.
So, my boss, he did a fluency reading.
Yeah.
On one of our students. And I covered my camera, but I recorded it. Do you want a copy of that recording and do reading it?
No, we don't have to have that.
Okay.
So, and that's, it's good for you to go back and review. I mean, so that's a good thing to do, right, as a teacher or helping out. So I don't need that necessarily. So,
Okay.
and then that way we just make sure that there's no privacy issues or any of that stuff, you know, which it wouldn't be really, but just.
You're looking at the school ceiling.
Right, yeah, exactly. You don't see anybody or anything, so. Okay. So what else we got here? So the fluency observation template. And, so this is just, again, kind of a, outline of the assignment. This is also in the assignment, but this is just a Word document here. Do the observation, do an analysis. The instructional plan can help with that. It doesn't have to be huge, right? But if you notice something, within the writing, or I mean, in the reading, and we can work on like, oh, they need to work on, I don't know, the certain sound that they keep missing, for example, right? So you could, do a short little, it doesn't even have to be a lesson, but just an identification of like, they need to work on this sound, we could do X, Y, and Z for that, right? You don't have to do a full lesson. For that, if you're struggling with that, or if you need help, just let me know, right? If you do it with somebody, and it's perfect, then whatever, you might have to say, oh, we would do some extra work or some enrichment work with it, rather than like something that's fixed. And then a little bit of reflection piece on that, what you saw, anything on the student or person that you did it on, as well as, your experience within that, or with the assessment of putting that together. The rubric is there for that, and so when you do it, you just put it in one document, right? Rather than multiple documents, so just use one Word document, okay. If you're gonna use the video, so the video is right here, and it's an adult that is reading the no sound. She is reading that. You have to go into it a little bit before it starts. Anyway, so as she starts into that, you'll see her cats come up there. One of the other videos I was working, she made videos. I don't know if I shared this one or not, but like her cats were up by her screen and in the way and stuff. It's kind of fun. Anyway, so she will read that Little Red Hen script. So you can use this, you get to the point where she starts reading and you go through that process, but down here is the script for the Little Red Hen. And obviously it's there, right? So you click on that, pull it up, and there it is right there. So you go through that part. Again, I can print that out for you, or if you want to use it just on the screen as you're watching her and then watching go through the words, you can mark down on a separate sheet of paper, like what words she got wrong, etc. So you can obviously, it's easy to go back through it multiple times and do that. So anyway, and then you follow that same process of putting those pieces together with that. Questions on that? Other questions? Okay, so it has 24th due. It's still it's still 2 weeks away on that. So I wanted to give you plenty of time to finish that up, since I got it most a little bit late putting that together. And so then last week's chapter and this week's chapter and next week's chapter is vocabulary components. So I'm gonna spend some time today going over a few of those pieces as well. One other thing that we got in here is another lesson plan components for some language arts. So just again, another heads up on that. If you want to combine things again with the social studies plan that we have coming up, that's fine. You can do that and then use that for both of them. But just another little bit of practice on some different language arts lesson plans and ideas and stuff. If you want help with it, want me to proofread, review, you just have to, again, let me know. You guys have any questions on that? The last one you guys did were great. They're super good. So I don't anticipate any issues, but if you want some ideas, whatever grade level, whatever topic that you want to choose, definitely do that. Okay. Some of this. And then again, looking ahead, obviously a few more chapters in this book than in our social studies component. So after today, I have three more chapters for you guys to review and put together. And then the last piece is that language arts unit. You have to remember us talking about this last week. Just briefly touch on it again. So 5 lesson plans put together to create a unit, so a broader topic, maybe spend more detail on that. Today I have some examples of like what a good like vocabulary unit might look like. So I mean, you could use that. You could just focus on vocabulary, pull in multiple different subject areas and topics, but looking at in your grade level and your standards and your choice to pull that in there. Are wanting to obviously pull in some either OSCU standards or the teaching of our elders are there as well for the North Dakota standards. So we pull in some of those components too. So. And that's the final piece for that. So again, we won't meet necessarily for that, but I will be here those days. And if you want me to preview it, give you some feedback on it before you submit it, let me know a little bit ahead of time so I have some time to do that for you. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna work on talking kind of in general a little bit about like vocabulary and the science of reading, connection with language arts pieces with that. And so share this piece. Because in terms of vocabulary, like the chapters here will cover things like specific word instruction, word learning strategies, and then word consciousness pieces, right? So they're broken up distinctly into 3 different areas with the vocabulary piece. But if we look at the science of reading component, right, vocabulary is very important. It's a core competency of the science of reading, right? So with vocab, as it says, there supports comprehension, fluency, overall literacy development, right? So if you don't know a word or can't read that word, it makes it difficult to do all those components, right? So it's grounded, as it says, in the science of reading principles. Science of reading principles include explicit, systematic, meaningful teaching of word knowledge and understanding of that, right? So it's not just the memorization of a word and how to say it and how to spell it, but also what does it mean? Where do you use it? How do you use it? Why it's important, etc. So within vocabulary, there's 7 pieces of that and how it fits into the science of reading piece. And so number 1 there talks about vocabulary in that SOR framework. So identifies 5 essential components of the reading, phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocab, and comprehension. So vocab, the important piece of that, it's that bridge, right, between decoding and comprehension. So students can decode words accurately, but without understanding their meanings, the comprehension breaks down, right? So sometimes students can understand a word based upon the context that it's in, and they can figure it out. But many times they may not be able to. So that's where the importance of teaching them not only how to say that word, but what that word means comes into play. And then as we move down to the second piece there, that the different types of vocabulary. So oral, especially in the elementary, right? So oral vocabulary, words that children understand and use in speech and are foundational for later reading. So when you think of oral vocabulary, what might be some important components, or as you think of those terms of oral vocabulary, what comes into play, do you think? Are there any words you can think of that would easily fit into that? Maybe it's not something that we teach necessarily.
That's like the words they use every day.
Right.
They're supposed to.
Yep, yeah, exactly. Yep. So you have students that might still use them incorrectly, right? It's things that they know, right? It's not necessarily sight words, but because sight words are those ones they see it and they know it, right? And they may use it every day, but just think of oral vocab as words that are pretty second nature to students. So the reading vocabulary then is that the words that students recognize and understand in print. The writing vocabulary are words students can spell and use in written expression, right? So those are the reading and writing are expanding and as they grow and develop, right? Because they don't know obviously everything, and it'll take us a little bit of time as new things come in to help them build those vocabularies of both reading and writing. And then the academic vocabulary, of course, words used across different content areas that students need, and probably all of them would not be words they use every day, right? It gives you some of the examples there of infer and analyze and stuff. So it's things that they will definitely probably use in school, but not necessarily that they would use at home or out in the community. So number 3 there talks about explicit vocab instruction, right? So that's an important piece of the science of reading, is that explicit and intentional teaching of vocab rather than relying on incidental exposure. And so whether it's a language arts lesson or it's a math, science, social studies, whatever, we have to do a little bit of work if we know there's some terms coming in there that students may not know, right? So it gives us some strategies there, right? Pre-teaching words, right? So rather than waiting for that word to come up in a passage or something we're doing, we know which of those new terms might be coming up, so we're going to pre-teach them. We're going to talk about them ahead of time, right? I've talked about like word walls and different things before, that getting those words up and even maybe some definitions might be good in that setting. And second thing there is teaching word meanings in context. So using texts to show how words function in a sentence. Okay? So pre-teaching them independently by themselves and then adding those words into context. You using it in a sentence, writing it up in a sentence on the board or on the whiteboard, Promethean board, etc., helps them understand that context where it should be used. Child-friendly definitions, especially with anybody actually, explaining meanings in language students can understand. So sometimes terms can be difficult, right? Especially technical terms and maybe some academic terms. So breaking that down a little bit more is a good way to help them understand that. Multiple exposures, of course, is good. The more times we're exposed to anything, the better chance we have of remembering it. And then deep processing, encouraging students to use words in speaking, writing, drawing, and categorizing. Okay, so when you have terms within your subject areas, different content areas, encouraging them to say that word multiple times, right? Sometimes kids, even us as adults, get settled in not being descriptive, right? And I am that way still sometimes, and I have been that way for, I'd say, we're doing stuff for, rather than getting that detailed in, right? So sometimes we have to help them with that process of, what's another way you can say that, or how can you integrate these terms, this word into that? So, and it wouldn't necessarily just be, yes, we are talking about vocab instruction, but anytime you want kids to be descriptive, helping them with that, because I don't know if it's second nature. Maybe it's not second nature for people. Maybe it is for some to just be able to be descriptive when they're talking or even when they're writing stuff. But my experience is that it's sometimes hard for kids to just explain that unless they really like to write or to talk about things. So number 4 talks about different instructional practices that we might align and use for science of reading piece. So those things there, like morphological awareness. So teaching things like prefixes, suffixes, roots of words, and to build upon the meaning of them are important. So that way, when we talk about what does re mean or bio or full, when you add those onto things, how it can change the meaning of those words. Semantic mapping is another strategy. So connecting new words to known concepts. Right? So you've probably seen that done before. You've probably had to do that yourself for things where you pull that map together and are able to make that connection between things and a word. Of course, synonyms, antonyms, and different categories. So when you do synonyms and antonyms for words, it just makes that connection and understanding of that word a little bit broader, because maybe what the opposite of that word means, or the same, another word that might mean the same or similar. So those do help. I can remember them being kind of annoying as a middle school and high school kid, like trying to figure those out, but it does help. So that you understand a broader sense of that term, so. Contextual analysis would be another one then, so training students to use surrounding text clues to infer meaning, super important for when kids get into situations where they don't know the word and maybe they can't ask for help, so that's like a test taking strategy too as well for like a standardized assessment. What are some words in that sentence that you know, and can that help you to figure out the understanding or meaning of that word you don't know, so. The rich oral language experiences, I think, is a good one, or not necessarily the best one, but when you do things like interactive read alouds, discussions, storytelling, where you have other people reading and some can listen, they can hear the sound of those words, right, and how it's supposed to sound. And then they get a little bit more sense of the pronunciation of that. Though they still may not know what some of those things mean sometimes, but they're starting to hear that. You just think about like the younger kids as they come to school when they're at home with families, right, or friends and or community. If they have a very rich language experience, they're coming to school with a better foundation of hearing different sounds, and hearing different words, understanding language a little bit differently. So the more rich the language experience or exposure to kids is, the better off their reading fluency, vocabulary, all that stuff is. So if we had kids that come into our classroom that are limited in that, that means that we just need to try to expose them that much more to it. So vocab and comprehension, we kind of did talk about that a little bit, but that does connect and help. So talking there about the simple view of reading comprehension equals decoding times language comprehension, right? So we know that the understanding of a vocab word or different vocabulary helps to directly impact language comprehension and kids' fluency and their understanding of that. So we have to make sure that we're continuously building that up in all of our subject areas. So there's a couple different things here in terms of assessment and how you can differentiate that. We know that formative assessment, right, is a quick, easy way to see, or doesn't necessarily mean easy, but a quick way to see if students grasp a concept. Okay? So things like exit tickets where maybe they have to write out a response, you visit with them or ask them a question, etc. Any discussion, so helping that students to helping us to understand whether a student got it or not. Tiered instruction, so this goes back a little bit to tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 groups, and we're talking about what levels they're at, right? So tier 2, which are high utility academic words, are the ones that we should try to teach most intently. So tier 1 are everyday words. Tier 3 are content specific words. Okay, so we're talking about vocab or language arts components. We're looking at those tier 2 high academic words. And so yes, we definitely still want the tier 1 and the tier 3, but those would be a little bit more, like the tier 3 is obviously a little bit more specific. We're talking about math, you know, and those pieces, where the everyday tier 1, we still have to include those because some students won't know, some might be new, etc. But the tier 2 is what we're kind of looking for, the intensity of those. So, and then lastly on that part, vocab into language arts specifically, right? So vocabulary instruction should be woven throughout the reading, writing, and speaking activities, which is an important part of that. Because again, going back to that comprehension piece, kids need to know what the word is, how to say it, to be able to put that together. So during read alouds or the fluency language experience, if it comes to a word where you know students may not know it or some are struggling with it, it's important to pause and talk about that. So that kids can pick that up. Some might know the words and terms, and you can have the kids incorporate that or be part of the explanation or understanding of that, you know, if you want to. So in writing tasks, encourage use of new vocab in journal entries, stories, and some of those things, if kids don't know how to spell those, it's okay that they misspell it, right, when they're working on that. And then we can come back to it later and fix it, right? Especially if it's something in a journal that you might be working with students on, where you're going to be reading that. you could do that correction for them and then they could come back and know that. Because if students are worried about always spelling things correctly, there might pause, that might, I don't want to say it's a hindrance, but they're going to be coming to you quite a bit. How do I spell this? How do I spell that? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Without, I don't want to say taking a chance, but it slows down that process, right, on that a little bit. So sometimes it's okay to have them just not worry about that spelling piece. We have centers, and then we also have inward study, connecting morphology and phonics to meaning. And then in centers, sorting, categorizing, matching games for reinforcement. So kids that might be struggling with some components can do some of that extra work there for different centers. And we talked about that, I think, in last class about how you can have maybe even 3 or 4 groups based on ability levels or grade levels, and then they can work on specific things that they might be struggling with or things that can help you enhance them or move them along in terms of that gifted and talented type piece there. Questions or thoughts on, that was just kind of a quick little overview of vocab and the science of reading piece, but it's important that you see and have some connection to that science of reading components. Again, we know that science of reading is not a curriculum, right? It's just a foundation. It's a framework for best practices. And as you go into classrooms in North Dakota, you definitely have to know what that science of reading is and the foundational component. So any comments or thoughts on that? There is mud. Based upon your guys, some of your observations, not, I mean, this semester or other semesters, your personal work and things, what are some things you've seen in terms of like vocab instruction or integration in classrooms?
Well, our goal is hard, I have to make a point to make it, explicit at the beginning of every unit. And incorporate, OG morphology practices into it.
Okay.
Bring in words every unit, break them down for the students, work through the different parts of them. And that was like something everybody had.
Sure.
That was like part of their. Unless you could feel like we did not have a version.
Yeah.
Part of their guidelines for all.
Sure. I think there was, and maybe there still is some, but like, I mean, I can recall when I was a teacher and also shortly after that there was a push for like everybody's a reading teacher, right? Everybody is involved with vocabulary or different things within their classroom, even if you were the PE teacher or the music teacher and different things like that. I know there's been a lot of schools that have done things with like, I can't reading first or different stuff where people are focused on the vocabulary piece and 10 vocabulary days, words a week, or just different things like that, where that seems to have been a big piece of that of every teacher's day or week, not just the language arts / reading teacher piece of that. So.
The art and the PE teacher had the hardest time with that piece.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with like.
Sit down and teach vocab to these kids in a gymnasium.
Yeah. You gotta be a little bit creative when it comes to some of those, pieces. I mean, I mean, it can be done, but I've seen things or thoughts where like they will or have it's an idea of connecting with classroom teachers of like what are some terms, that they are working on within that whatever content, and then they would try to incorporate them into their classroom, right? Like not that it had any connection to PE, but they were just trying to figure out something different because maybe they didn't have a ton of vocab words that they were able to use or something. So yeah, it definitely takes some practice takes some work to get those pieces together with that vocab piece. But you definitely have some areas where it is, I mean, a little easier to do that, right, within content areas. But it's those specials that can be difficult sometimes. So what I gave you guys was a little bit of a framework and outline of ways to teach vocab based upon that science of reading component, right? And so it's not like a curriculum, right? But it's a structured approach to teaching vocab in elementary classrooms. So again, explicit, systematic, meaning-based instruction in phonology, morphology, and comprehension of development. So as you go through this, again, it just kind of gives you some examples and outlines that a person could follow when putting together like a week-long vocab unit or lesson plans, right? So guiding principles within their explicit instruction, systematic exposure to new and previously taught vocab words, because we know there can be connections, right, to things that we know and new words, and the more we can connect kids past learning or what they already know to new things, the better chance they will be engaged with it. So again, then talking about or integrating phonology, morphology, semantics, and syntax, and then meaningful practice in reading, writing, and oral context. So getting to understand the word, talk about the word, expose them to the word, then how do they practice it, right? So with vocab, it's not just all going to be about reading, right? There's definitely some opportunity for that language arts piece in there. We'll talk about the writing component of it, even maybe speeches or different conversations that kids have within maybe their pods or groups if they're working that way. So if you look at that, the rest of that first page there, and it looks at different components to effective vocab instruction. So let me pull this down here. So selection of words, high quality, high utility context rich tier 2 words. What did we say tier 2 words were? Do you remember on that last piece?
But high academic quality and usage.
Right, yeah, so it's not tier 1 or those everyday words, right? Tier 2 are the academic words, the words that we're going to be using throughout the day at school. And then that tier 3 is that content specific, right? The science ones, the math ones, et cetera. So so as we look at that, it also gives us examples here, right, of some words that are in that tier 2 category: investigate, predict, observe, et cetera. On that. So when we use explicit instruction, then we directly teach that word's meaning using visuals, examples, et cetera. On that, okay? And then kind of like this because it gives us an example to take a look at in terms of what that means. So predict means to make a smart guess about what might happen next, right? So simple way to share that. Contextual learning is the number 3 component, right? So embed that vocab in meaningful reading context. And so here it gives example of discussing vocab during read alouds and shared reading, right? So if there's a term that comes up, pausing to share that again, reinforce that word again, or maybe we don't need to pause. It might just depend on the complexity of that vocab word, but it's got to be in that read aloud. Doesn't make any sense to go over some terms and work on things and then not have them in a passage that you're reading. So we talked about this a little bit too. Word relationships, synonyms, antonyms, those different pieces are important in there as well. So exploring happy versus joyful, unhappy, happiness. Active engagement then encourage students to use words orally and in writing, right? So if you're doing some journaling or writing, you might have to force them to use those terms, right? If it's new or they're struggling with it a little bit. If you're doing it orally, having group work and encouraging that conversation piece, but really getting them to use those words, right? So I'm going to guess that X, Y, and Z. Nope, don't say yes. I'm going to predict that X, Y, and Z. Reinforcing that with them. So. Repetition and review, of course, so revisiting words across context, that's why we go back and forth, right? Maybe a term they learned last week or 2 weeks ago, but you can bring it back again for review. In a couple weeks to help keep that, doesn't have to be fully fresh or happen all the time, but just some continuous exposure to some of those terms that they'll be using again and again. That's kind of where examples, the word walls come in, games, different journals are important. Last one, assessment and reflection. So monitoring that understanding through formal and then probably also summative assessments as well are important to get there. So the second page there gives us an example of a routine that you can use for the introduction of certain vocab words and terms, right? So first day would be introduce and connect. Day 2 would be deepen their understanding of that. 3 is apply and use. 4 is word study, morphology. And then day 5, review and assess. Okay, so that could be something that could be a continuous cycle of pieces. If you have a 5-day school week, that's a great piece that you might use. If you have a 4-day school week, then maybe you shift those around to review and assess on Monday and also then introduce and connect new ones. Anyway, that's a way to put some things together with that. So it also gives you the focus there and how you align that to the science of reading as well. Typically introducing 4 to 6 new tier 2 words when you start that 5-day instructional routine piece of that, making sure to build background knowledge stuff on that. So excuse me. Okay. So as you integrate this or work to integrate this process across the curriculum, so if we're looking at things for reading component, right? Highlight target words during read alouds or guided reading, so make sure you point those terms out. If there is something that you didn't realize that might be a struggle for students, right? Hopefully you would pick that up from them. Number one, if they're struggling to read it or they're asking questions, then you just have to pause and go back. The writing piece include target words and journal entries or sentence fragments. So making sure that they use those words. Again, you might have to provide a writing prompt for them, or if you're having them do some open journaling where they can write about whatever they want. Sometimes that's the case for different things. Have them use those words in there. Speaking and listening, use word of the day discussions or think, pair, share, right? So again, forcing them to use that word or some of those words while they're visiting with their classmate, right? You might be walking around monitoring, listening, hoping that you'll hear those words that they need to be saying. And then last of that content area, reinforcing vocab, science, social studies, math, etc. On that. So here's some examples of some tools that we can use or that in your classroom. So journals, we talked about that already, but you can do specifically vocab journals. If you want, where they're writing down new words, meanings of those words, different sentences that they might use them in. And this doesn't have to be an old school, like, it depends on your grade level. It doesn't have to be a book per se, like, or a journal book, right? It could be, if they're old enough to have whatever, maybe it's a Surface tablet, it's a laptop, something that they might use, they can do that electronically as well, right? They might have a Google Classroom folder. That would be something that they could do there as well. So we touched base on semantic maps already a little bit. Anchor charts, so displaying prefixes, suffixes, roots of different words so that they helps them understand and connect what those terms mean, what they could mean. Word walls, we talked about that already. Games, so like word bingo, matching games, word detectives, all those things are easy. I shouldn't say easy, but are fun things that then they can do to work on, again, prefixes, suffixes, matching terms to definitions, etc. And then lastly, here, well, not lastly, but some assessment components, right? I've talked about formative a little bit already, but looking at that immediate understanding piece of that. So again, exit tickets or just oral questioning, right? Asking simple question. Summative then is looking obviously at that cumulative growth. So you might do a vocab quiz, you might do written responses to different terms that you're working on. Then you could also do a performance-based assessment, right? So what is the context that they're doing those things in, right? So journals, speaking tasks, work writing samples. Again, this is an opportunity to do things a little bit differently, right? For students that might struggle or might be comfortable doing things one way or another. It can be hard to do trying to say, a speaking task, right? If you have 20 kids in your class, you have to listen to all 20 of them read a passage or whatever it might be. But if you have a checklist, right, and you're able to maybe walk around and listen to kids a little bit, you might hear them talking about stuff. You can check that off. You can make some notes on that. So you have to get a little bit creative sometimes to get all those students in if you're doing that speaking task component to that. It also gives you a little bit of a way or example on how to do like a little mini lesson or a quick routine in terms of learning new words. So saying the word, writing definition, connect, engage, apply, review, some examples of that. So. And then it also talks a little bit about the connection to that science of reading. Why does this process connect to the science of reading? It has supporting language comprehension, and it's using that phonological awareness, decoding, morphology, the three types of instruction: explicit, systematic, and cumulative, which is important, and then it's building background knowledge with the students to help with that comprehension of that term, the use of that term within different content settings. Okay, so just a little bit of an outline. Maybe you guys have that already, or you understand that, but just a way to connect vocab instruction to the science of reading framework that is super important and is the law in North Dakota that you know that and use that. So, any questions on that or thoughts on that? Hopefully, it's somewhat helpful. So if you wanted to do, what are the language arts lesson plans here in connection with that vocabulary stuff, that's more than obviously okay to do that piece, but yeah, vocab is a big part of language arts, because without the understanding of that, it's hard to continue to write or to speak and to present that in a manner that we understand when listening to our students. So yeah, and then next week is the last part of that vocab term, the word consciousness. So we'll work on that piece a little bit at the end next week for that. So any questions or comments? Okay, so the fluency observation assessment, not until the 24th. The lesson plan next Monday morning, 8 a.m. So it makes sense to do the lesson plan first, I guess, then then the fluency assessment this year. We got that started. So. Okay, if you need help on any of them, please let me know. Please reach out. So,
Can we incorporate our language arts lesson time into our 5-day unit time?
yeah, absolutely. That could be like one of those pieces. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I don't.
It's tricky, not like.
I mean, maybe it would, but I won't know that. I mean, we already talked about it, so yeah. It sometimes, I mean, Turnitin is okay, but it's like not always totally accurate with stuff. So I mean, I've had that multiple times where like even my own stuff, like